My original inspiration on this film was really to use mythological motifs to create a whole new kind of myth that was very updated and contemporary. So I used the Saturday matinee serial as my vessel to put this barrel of mythological motifs together.
I first met George actually through Francis Coppola. Francis and I go way back to the Roger Corman days. We worked on several Roger Corman low-budget pictures together. We went out to Mill Valley to meet George, who was editing THX, because George was going to direct Apocalypse. And then a few months later, we realized that Columbia really was not interested in doing a film about the Vietnam War while the war was still going on. So the project kind of got put on the back burner, and George talked about his rock and roll musical, which eventually became American Graffiti, and we made that for Universal. And all during this time, he was talking about Flash Gordon and the fact that he would like to do a Flash Gordon kind of 1930s space opera. And after American Graffiti did pretty well at the box office, why we made the rounds of the studios. And in the late 70s, science fiction seemed to be all about apocalyptic societies and death and destruction, and not very inspiring. Plus the fact that 2001, which had come out in 1968, was a big critical cult hit, but not very financially successful. So we were fighting an uphill battle with the science fiction project completely.
The opening shot we shot several times. The model that was built was a little bit on the small side, so it was very hard to get the shot that I wanted, which was this huge, huge ship going over that just went on for miles. And normally, if you were doing that, you would build a model that was 10 or 12 feet long.
And this opening shot was shot by Richard Edlund. The model was made by the crack ILM model shop team. They had a whole bunch of guys under the supervision of Grant McCune. And this model is really only about 3 feet long, but Richard came up with a way to make it look much, much longer. The model is almost touching the camera, and the camera's moving over the model. It's all upside down, and it just looks massive.
I went to see the movie at the Chinese theater, and with that shot, which I always felt, by the way, was one of the most important shots in the movie for the visual effects, because if the audience bought that shot, you had them. And if you failed with that shot, you lost them. And with Johnny Williams' music, which was masterstroke, I sat back in awe of the material that we had done.
The opening there that the ship's going into is only about 4 or 5 inches long, and the ship that's going into it, photographed separately, is 6 feet long.
My involvement began 9 months before they actually went into the shooting of the film. In 1975, and I was just graduating from USC Film School when I got a call from Gary Kurtz. They were looking for someone to go out and gather sound effects that they could use as a library of material for the production. So it was a very unusual circumstance. The habit in Hollywood was not to bring sound people, sound editors, or sound mixers onto a production until the picture had actually been finished in editing. But George wanted something different. He wanted a very customized, very special soundtrack, not the kind of track that you'd get by just pulling effects from a library of pre-recorded sound. He wanted someone to go out and gather and develop specific sounds for the film. Once I read the script, I realized there were hundreds of items in the film, everything from ambiances to weapons to alien voices to the voice of R2-D2. And I asked George Lucas whether he wanted me to gather sounds for everything in the script, and they said, sure, go ahead. And they sent me a Nagra tape recorder. It's a portable tape recorder, along with a few microphones, and I was just turned loose to go out and gather sound by myself for about a year.
D2, where are you?
Most of the spaceships, like the blockade runner at the beginning of the film, it turned out that using World War II warbirds and slowing the sound down a lot gave a visceral pass-by quality which worked well. And sometimes I would add an explosion or a thunderclap or even an animal roar like a lion underneath the sound of the airplane pass-by to give it an additional sort of characteristic.
The lip gloss that I had on, that I magically had through every battle, the gloss was there. I'm anti-gloss now, but it's too late.
The Death Star plans are not in the main computer.
Where are those transmissions you intercepted? What have you done with those plans?
We intercepted no transmissions. This is
I said to him, are you going to cut to two people on the ship when Vader first appears and say, oh, it's Dark Lord of the Sith, he's this, that, and the other? He said, no, he's all in black, and we'll do a sting of scary music, and everybody will know. And I think that was one of the best things they did, was let the audience bring to it what they want to bring to it, rather than us laying out every aspect of what we were trying to do.
For R2, I was looking for something different than the little robots that were done for Silent Running that Doug Trumbull had done. They were square, and I knew that our robots would be compared to their robots. Because George had talked about them, he'd said, well, the little robots in Silent Running, we wanted a little worker robot like that for R2-D2. And I thought, well, I'll make him, instead of a box, I'll make him a can, a cylinder with a dome on top. That was my first thought, just strictly in the sense that I didn't want him to look like the Silent Running robots. They had 2 legs, so I thought I could give R2 3 legs. The first one I think he had a spherical bottom. It was like a ball bearing that would roll around. He had gyroscopes in him so that he didn't fall over, and he just leaned in whatever direction he wanted to do and spun his single wheel, which is really a sphere, which sounded pretty interesting, but very difficult to do in reality. And I put little panels on him and places for arms to come out. I knew he had to have a lot of little gadgets that he was kind of like a Swiss Army knife, And he had to have lights, and he had to have lenses to see through. He had to have color to distinguish him from another robot, so I found places to put blue.
Were beamed to the ship by rebel spies. I want to know what happened to the plans they sent you.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away!
I hated that hairstyle, but I thought they were going to fire me and bring in Jodie Foster and just let me be killed in a stunt. So when I came in with the terrible hairstyle and he said, it's good. What do you think of it? I said, fantastic. It doesn't matter that they changed my hairstyle. That first one, it's, inflammable. It's indestructible. That's the hairstyle that will follow me, well, to everyone's grave.
Bombs were aboard. She must have hidden the plans in the escape pod. Set a detachment.
Part of, I think, being a successful filmmaker is you get an idea, you fall in love with the idea, and you're very tenacious about making sure it gets done. And you will get it done no matter what happens and no matter what circumstances you have to do it under. It was partially an experiment in making a Hollywood-style movie. I'd never done it before. I'd been an independent filmmaker and made movies on the streets, with a really small crew. And I'd sort of become interested in the idea of what it was like to actually have sets and to shoot on a sound stage, do something that was a fantasy that didn't have any basis in reality. And then I had a lot of other motivations of wanting to tell a kind of a young person's movie, to base it on mythology and to do things very, very old-fashioned. It's an old-fashioned movie based on an old-fashioned idea.
What a desolate place this is. Where do you think you're going? Well, I'm not going that way. It's much too rocky. This way.
It seemed like an interesting film. I'd read the script. It sounded like nothing I'd done before. I suppose I'd touched science fiction because I did 2001: A Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick. But this was very different because it didn't obey the rules of space that we had been so rigid about in 2001.
The most successful science fiction film up to that point was 2001. And successful then was that it made about $24 million or something like that. Most hit science fiction films would make about $16 million, which was the Planet of the Apes films and that sort of thing. But most science fiction films would make under $10 million. I mean, there's no reason to think that it would do any different.
No more adventures. I'm not going that way.
One of the reasons that George wanted to see me all those years ago to get inside a metal suit that had yet to be built was that then, as hopefully now, I have quite a slender frame. I have to work on it rather more these days. But that was one of the criterion, because otherwise the suit would end up being huge if it was on a sort of regular-sized person. And the other qualification, apart from being an actor, was that I'd, for a long time, especially when I was at drama school, developed an interest in the art of mime, which is so boring on its own. But what it is kind of bodily control and technique. And George kind of got that that was the sort of person you might need to sort of create this type of role.
Tricked me into going this way, but he'll do no better. Wait, what's that? A transport. I'm saved. Over here! Hey!
And then with 3PO, eventually, you know, the mime and the acting and the voice all came together in a kind of weird configuration.
With R2-D2, we actually had that made by a small company at Shepperton Studios, and he arrived white with blue panels and the aluminum panels. We were all sort of very proud of him. It really looked wonderful. And George said, well, we have to make him something like Make Him Live or Make Him Real or something. And we have to age him. That's what we did. The paint department and the prop department sort of beat him up, really. And he said, that's how it should be. That's how it should be. And that set the trend for the movie. And all of that really was, I have to say, was entirely down to George, because that's the way that he envisaged the movie looking, really.
And my agent said to me, there's a guy in town called Lucas, and he's looking for somebody to go inside a robot that they've made, a prototype already, and they couldn't find anyone that would fit inside it to make it move. And they couldn't use kids because it was quite a heavy machine, you know, it was weighed about 80 pounds at least. And they want you to go down there and see, you know, I didn't know what it was all about, to be honest. And they want you to go down to the special effects department in Harleston, northwest London. I think that's where I first saw it. And I went down there, and I just walked into this room, and they all went, yes, he'll do.
So sometimes that was a human, Annie Baker, and sometimes it was whatever it was.
Norman Reynolds, who was the art director under John Barry, was later to become the designer on the Empire Strikes Back, personally had to come to Tunisia because he had overseen the C-3PO, and it was ready the first day. R2-D2 didn't really function that well. He could run along in the three-legged position, but he couldn't turn his head at the same time.
They developed this with a third leg. It worked up to a point, but it just sort of sat back and took off smoothly. Whereas I'm always jiggering around in my robot. But it's the same size as me, really. The problem was the feet. That was the problem. And I could get into it, that's easy. You just take off the head like a boiled egg and then just drop me in. I couldn't get in myself. And just lower me down slowly. And I'd try and work my feet into the feet at an angle of 45 degrees and then flat feet, which was very uncomfortable.
A lot of the attempts at doing R2-D2's voice, the outtakes, so to speak, ended up being the voices of other robots in the film. The binocular robot, the various other R2 units on board the Sandcrawler. So most of the material that I generated got used somewhere in the film. It just became robots of less importance.
There were sharp edges everywhere, and nuts and bolts and things sticking out everywhere. It was very uncomfortable, very claustrophobic. There were wires everywhere. And they said, can you move the head? Well, the head was on a ball bearing, was on a track of ball bearings. And then I used to grab whatever I could grab hold of and turn it physically that way and that way, not very far. Because I went too far, the wires would go around my neck.
R2-D2, it is you! It is you!
The Java voices and their development became the prototype for how we would develop languages and alien voices for those characters in the films that were not electronic, but they spoke an actual organic tongue. And I listened to a lot of language tapes from around the world, and out of that came samples of languages, real languages, which sounded very exotic, and they weren't recognizable as something familiar. But like any real language, they come with their unique historic and cultural details. They're usually developed over a long period of time. I was listening to a lot of different African languages, and Zulu came up in a recording, and in listening to it, I thought that this might be a good basis for the Jawa language for a start.
Do you think they'll melt us down? Don't shoot, don't shoot. Will this never end?
And we located a man who spoke Zulu in the Los Angeles area and brought him into the studio, and I did a whole recording session with him, had him try out different voices. He was not an actor, but he was directable, and he knew obviously his native tongue very well. And I ended up having him tell me stories, and I had conversation with him, and I got him to give me a range of emotional responses, to ask questions, to make declarations, to give me different phrases. And out of that, I extracted from those recordings bits and pieces. And once I got the Jawa sounds under development, I was then able to take them further by imitating the Zulu myself and getting another friend named Rick Victor together. And we actually went out into the rocks. We went out to Vasquez Rocks, a famous location north of Los Angeles where we could get good echoes and reflections.
Oh, not that one.
We went out into the rocks and did other recordings of Jawas so that they actually sounded like they're really outside. So by blending the studio recordings in Zulu with the manufactured kind of double talk Zulu done in the studio, as well as on exterior locations, we were able to fabricate a little culture of Jawa voices.
Can you speak Bocce? Of course I can, sir. It's like a second language to me. I'm a
All right, shut up. I'll take this one.
Shut up, sir.
Luke!
This scene here, buying the droids, was actually the first scene in the movie. The first scene we shot when we shot the movie.
Converters.
You can waste time with your friends when your chores are done. Now, come on, get to it.
All right, come on.
We sat there, George and I, in the second interview, and we talked about robots. We talked about how the suit might be, and it was going to be pretty much as Ralph McQuarrie's painting could be made physically. It meant I immediately had to go to Elstree Studios, a room covered in polythene, and two workmen in overalls and buckets and bags of plaster, and I stood there with no clothes on, being slapped with buckets of plaster of Paris. Truly one of the most disgusting experiences of my life. Took days to kind of get it out of my system. And what resulted then was this absolutely appalling copy of my body. It was revolting. I just looked awful. Because you don't get to stand outside yourself that often. And it kind of hung around the studio for a while to my chagrin. I was like, please don't look, The process continued from this body cast. This is where it began to get really kind of nice, because the sculptor, Liz Moore, began to create in clay, using my body as the matrix, if you like, created the shape that was eventually going to become 3PO as you recognize it. And she was just terrific.
Dust contamination, I can barely move. It just isn't fair.
One day I walked in and there were these row of heads, like some kind of terrible execution scene, just all sorts of different things. Liz had used all her art to bring this character alive. And George said, which one do you like? And the one I didn't like was, that one. And George said, That's the one I chose. And the terrible, terrible truth was that eventually, before it ever got filmed, Liz was killed in a car crash and never saw her creation. I kind of hope there's some great screening room in the skies where she's sitting. I did that.
C3PO, human-cyborg relation. And this is my counterpart, R2-D2.
Hello. You got a lot of carbon scoring here. Looks like you boys have seen a lot of action.
With all we've been through, sometimes I'm amazed we're in as good condition as we are. What with the rebellion and all.
It was a scramble. C3PO was finally put together for the very first time the day before we started shooting. If you like, almost that morning.
And the night before, far from having rehearsals and cameras and everything to help me, I was sitting on the edge of my bed in this, I have to say, scuzzy hotel.
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
There were no other hotels. They only did scuzzy back then. Okay. Alec Guinness was in another hotel, which was meant to be grand, but I think was more scuzzy because he was the one who ended up with food poisoning. So I think, hey. And I'm sitting on the edge of my bed with Maxie, my dresser. Maxie was from props. So right at the beginning, I began to get the idea that maybe I wasn't quite an actor, or at least that was the way I was viewed, that this costume could not be run by somebody from wardrobe. Wardrobe don't do heavy metal. They don't do fiberglass. They don't do aluminium. They do silk. They do cotton. But there we were that night, sitting on my bed, Maxie and me, gluing the hands together.
He says that he is the property of Obi-Wan Kenobi, a resident of these parts, and it's a private message for him. Quite frankly, sir.
A lot of the electronic backgrounds that are used throughout the film, the telemetry, the kind of radio sounds you hear low level, which make this place seem alive and kind of futuristic, came from recordings off an old shortwave radio that belonged to my grandfather, built in the 1930s. It seems as though it received sound that nobody else could get. And I used to dial around and be fascinated by all the electronic noise and signals that seem to be coming from space or somewhere in the atmosphere. And I had recorded some of the shortwave sounds as a teenager and saved the tapes. And when it came to developing a lot of the ambiences for Star Wars, I went back through those old shortwave radio recordings and pulled out little snippets of sound here and there and, ran it at different speeds and put it through echo chambers and had a lot of fun building the telemetry backgrounds, which are part of the fabric of Star Wars.
Where'd she go? Bring her back. Play back the entire message.
What message?
I understood who Luke had to be. Mostly when I wanted to edge my way into Han Solo territory and be a little more cynical or jaundiced. I had to be the one that was most sincere. It was tough because, I enjoy being a straight man. And I always felt like, well, if I don't set the robots up right, they're not, it's the old George Burns syndrome. Gracie gets all the laughs. But that didn't mean that I didn't want some of the jokes.
The script took many, many forms, and originally we were looking for a straightforward kind of adventure scenario, loosely based on some of Kurosawa's approach, like The Hidden Fortress, which was we actually tried to buy the rights to at one time. We also tried to buy the rights to Flash Gordon as a comic strip, and both of them were unavailable for either because of cost or because they just didn't want anybody else to do a film on them. But the script shifted and up and back in terms of complications, in terms of characters, in terms of how the basic story worked, and whether or not it was a kind of Hidden Fortress-like adventure of taking the princess across hostile territory, which is what Hidden Fortress is all about, or more complicated than that, and one that involved several different kinds of worlds, and in the end, it seemed to settle down to a very straightforward, almost Western-like adventure with a coming-of-age story and very archetypal characters, and it seemed to gestate into that through all of the various drafts. And we also realized that the original outline, as it developed, was way too complicated and too long a time span, too many characters, and it couldn't be made into one film. So We picked a section out of the middle that looked like it could be made into a single film.
I'm going nowhere. He knows your advice.
Oh, and he can't stay here forever. Most of his friends have gone. It means so much to him.
I'll make it up to him next year. I promise.
Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him.
That's what I'm afraid.
The very last day we were there, the last shot we did is the shot of Luke Skywalker looking up at the two suns setting. There was one in there, and good old ILM laid in the second one. And we stood there, and I watched the shot as the sun went down, and we got it. And the minute the sun dropped, it started raining. And I said, we had to get off the salt flat or we get stuck because the crust breaks and it turns into grease. We got everybody off, but we left a Tunisian army 6-wheel drive crane that was totally ploughed in. We couldn't get it out. And another vehicle, but we got everything we needed for shooting out. It was like that all the way down the line.
I had a space gun as a child, and it made a little buzzing sound, and I loved it, and I always associated that sound with spacemen and science fiction. And I recorded that sound and used it for the restraining bolt buzzer that Luke uses to locate 3PO.
That R2 unit has always been a problem. These astro droids are getting quite out of hand. Even I can't understand their logic at times.
Why I love 3PO so much is like Luke's only friend. If people read the novelization or I don't know if the original screenplay is available, you see what I thought was important to the character, which has never been put back in any of the restored versions, is you see Luke at his local hangout with people his own age to show where he stands, socially. And he's not admired. Well, I guess they think he's a good pilot, but it wasn't like his character was popular or the in guy or even had a girlfriend. They all ridicule his aspirations and his sort of starry-eyed attitude. He's apolitical at that point. He just wants to get out of the house, and everybody can relate to
He
that.
said he had some things to do before he started today, so he left early.
Did you take those 2 new droids with him?
I think so.
Well, you better have those units in the South Range repaired by midday, or they'll be hell to pay.
Look, there's a droid on the scan.
We started rehearsals about 6 weeks before we started shooting. I met Mark Hamill, who came over to play Luke Skywalker. Liked him, got on immensely. Keen-looking and agile young man who wanted to do as much as he could himself. In fact, I had times when I had to keep him back because he was too enthusiastic, actually. And I was the only stunt person on the picture in Tunisia. And really, I got my break through George, because one particular sequence, Luke Skywalker had to be attacked by Tusken Raider, or a sand person, as it is. So I took Luke up into the mountains to rehearse the sequence where we were going to shoot it. Now, George gave me carte blanche to use any weapon I liked. And I picked up what I called a Gaddafi stick, which came from the prop shop. And the reason I chose it, I was in the British Army, so I was used to rifle and bayonet. And I realized this weapon I could use like a rifle and a bayonet. So that's what I rehearsed the fight with. Anyway, come the day of the shooting, and I'd rehearsed Mark. I said to George, who's the stunt person who's going to do the fight? I said, because we don't have any stunt people apart from me. And he said, well, you better play it. As simple as that. That is me. And that is the Tusken Raider.
And I had a real good sense that this movie was going to be a hit. I mean, but when George cast Alec Guinness, I was totally convinced that this movie was going to be a blockbuster, because Alec Guinness could pull off Trust in the Force Luke. Those lines under a lesser actor would have fallen flat.
I was very surprised when Alec Guinness was in it, because you always think of Alec Guinness as like a Shakespearean type of actor, don't you? Sort of deep, hard, long speeches and goodness knows what else. But he took this role, I thought, it must be a good movie, because if he's in it, he must know what he's doing.
I was in Hollywood making a movie called Murder by Death with David Niven and Peter Sellers and various friends of mine. And on my second from last day, a script arrived on my dressing table, and I saw it was going to be directed by George Lucas. Now, George Lucas I knew about because of American Graffiti, which I admired very much. And so I was immediately excited. When I opened it and I saw science fiction, I thought, oh, Lord, I've never done a science fiction. I've seen one or two and quite enjoyed them, but always thought they were a bit hardboard from an actor's point of view. But because of Lucas, I started reading it, and then I found myself involved. There was an excitement in the script. I mean, I wanted to turn each page to know what happened next. I mean, very much so. I wanted to know the storyline, but I also wanted to know each little incident, how it was concluded. I found a carrying forward. I mean, like reading a novel which you don't want to put down.
Do you know who he's talking about?
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan. Now, that's a name I've not heard in a long time. A long time.
I think my uncle knows him. He said he was dead.
Oh, he's not dead. Not yet.
You know him?
Well, of course I know him. He's me. I haven't gone by the name of Obi-Wan since before you were born.
He loved the idea of playing a mentor or wizard in a morality play where good and evil so clearly defined, and that's what appealed to him.
It's a sort of a cross, I mean, a sort of wise man, some warrior in outer space at some time or other who's been on the run and then hiding in the desert from his enemies, but has a lot of knowledge about life and about space, presumably. A kind of sort of mystical character who's raked into the story to assist the young people. I think he's meant to suggest a kind of jump ahead in his imagination or in his awareness of what's going to happen.
But he had a great sense of humor. And I've told this story, but I kept referring to him as Sir Alec. And he tapped me twice and then gave me a pretty good, what? He said, I want to be known by my name, not my accolade. To which I replied, what do you want me to call you, Big Al? He loved that sort of stuff. He loves American irreverence.
Wish I'd known him. He was the best star pilot in the galaxy.
He'd come to our defense in terms of defending the sort of American way, because we sort of stereotypically have poor grammar. We were watching that documentary about Monty Python, and Graham Chapman was talking about Terry Gilliam. And he said we were flying over the Great Lakes, and Terry, being an American, he says, parenthetically, his comment was, hey, you guys, a whole bunch of water. And Graham's comment was, he tends to say bunch a lot, when in fact he means a lot. In that kind of snotty way where you want to smack him. And yet, Alec would point out how that was perfectly acceptable to use, even though he wasn't referring to bananas.
Elegant weapon for a more civilized age. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark.
George himself called it the most expensive low-budget movie ever made. And it seemed facetious at the time, but you could see that he meant it or at least I took it in the sense that every dollar is going to wind up on the screen. But I probably suffered from what George suffered from, because when you read it, there's no budgetary limitations on your imagination. So you imagine it, far more opulent and grandiose than what you're able to achieve. And, there were times where I thought, kind of disappointing. But you have to keep the faith, because even though the lightsabers look kind of chintzy, when we were shooting them in post-production, they were able to give them the look that they needed to have. Of course, the great Ben Burtt's sound effects, sell it really well.
And where you come from.
I saw part of the message.
The handle was from an antique camera that would do the flash powder. But the effect of the lightsaber was basically a rotating pole that had movie screen material applied to it so that it would reflect its light source back at many times the intensity. So there were baby pin spots directed at it, and they shot it through angled green glass. I mean, this is to my memory. So I didn't think it looked all that hot, but then they said, come around and look through the lens, and it did look great. It was movie screen material. It had, all that reflective sandpaper-looking surface to it. And the problem was that when you moved it out of a certain area, it went from glowing and looking great through the angled green glass to just a rotating pole. Because I'd hold my hand still. I had the battery pack with the wires running down my arm, and everybody would stop and they'd run in and they'd put the pole onto the handle, and I'd click it on and it would rotate. I thought it would be the handles and they'd put in cartoon blades later. But if you were sword fighting, you wouldn't know when to stop your hand. You needed something to strike.
I've got work to do. It's not that
The concept of the Force was an important one in the story, and the difficulty is trying to create a religious spiritual concept that works in a very simple way without heavy exposition or without it seeming to pull down the story.
Look, I can take you as far.
In the end, I had studied Hinduism, Buddhism, and many of the Eastern religions, and so I felt that was the way to go with the Force. That it's a very simple approach and still very powerful. The connection with the universe was kind of blending that with Native American spiritual teachings, which believe that everything is tied to a kind of universal energy that they call the Great Mystery. And it just seemed to fit because of the way the character needed to talk about it and the way that, in Luke's case, tap into it at the end, and yet not be so complicated that the audience would turn off about it, or even if they didn't get it, it wouldn't matter because it all worked anyway on the surface.
Vader would have become infinitely more powerful if he hadn't ended up in his suit and being half man, half machine, which diminishes his powers considerably over the powers the Emperor has. So, and I wanted that relationship of Vader kind of being reduced to, an assistant is too low a word, but he's a henchman, which is what the impression you had when you saw the first movie by itself. But if you reflect on it a little bit, you realize that that's actually not the way it is. The fact that he basically takes orders from Tarkin, who isn't an equal to him at all. He's way below him, really. But he doesn't have much choice because he's hobbled by his infirmities and the new order, which he's become a part of.
Out of this technological terror you've constructed, the ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped.
There's a few different effects associated with Vader using the Force. We always put in a deep, low-frequency kind of earthquake rumble, which could be amped up as Vader tightened the Force on someone.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Enough of this. Vader, release him.
As you wish.
The deep rumbles came from a number of different sources. Some of it was just some thunder that was slowed way down and the high frequencies rolled off. Some of it was the slowed down sound of a missile launch. And some of it was from the Fox library, actually. It was some earthquake material made for Journey to the Center of the Earth. Star Wars being a Fox film allowed us to, if we wanted to use some sound effects from their old classic library. And being a real fan of the old sound effects, I did pull a few things and use them here and there. But most of the effort was put into customizing original sounds for the movie.
And these last points, too accurate for sand people. Only Imperial stormtroopers are so...
One day, maybe I was bored, I took my microphone and I put it inside the pipe that's part of the suction device on a vacuum cleaner. And I held it out the window and I just pointed it at the Los Angeles freeway. And the roar of the freeway as it went through this metal pipe and then to the microphone had a funny kind of phasing or slight echoing to it, and that became the sound of the force field of the land speeder as it hovers in space. It became the basis actually for all the kind of levitation force fields which are used in many Star Wars speeders and other vehicles. There's a line in the film that Luke uses. He says, "Sand people, or worse." And for some reason, somewhere along the way in post-production, the picture editing department began to say to any sound editor that showed up, "Oh, sound people, or worse." And at first it was a little bit of a mockery, but we began to take that mockery serious, and we had a T-shirt made up that said "Sound people, or worse," which had a picture of a Tusken Raider on it, and instead of holding his gaffy stick, he had a fishpole with a microphone on the end of it. And so it became a badge of honor to be a sound person.
My little cell away from home. I look a little frightened, with my feet that don't touch the floor. The dental thing was ominous, though, the little dental robot. Yeah, I knew right then. Is it safe? In the original script, I was tortured by Darth Vader, who naturally turns out to be my father, by being hung upside down under the Death Star somewhere with yellow eyes. And then the Wookiee carries me through subterranean vats of water or something. And I thought, well, who doesn't want to do that?
We did vacation work in Tunisia on the edge of the Sahara, on some of these extraordinary salt flats which stretch for 100 miles. Well, they've virtually gone to the Sahara, it stretches for 3,000 miles. And there's a great feeling of strange, flat space. It is genuine space. It's real and gritty. And also shots in canyons in the sandstone hills, which are very dramatic to look at. But you feel it's real. It's not some made-up world. Wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Probably the focal point for alien voices in the film is in the Mos Eisley Cantina, which was a real exciting sequence for sound because I had very primitive equipment back then that I could use to change the pitch of a voice, make it very low or make it very high. And of course, everything was mechanical in those days in terms of how we dealt with sound. If I wanted a voice to change, I could speed the motors up, which ran the tape recorder, and the voice would run faster and be higher pitched.
One of the hardest shots we had was the land speeder where it drives up to the front of the cantina. We shot that shot using the VistaVision camera with the actors on board the land speeder, and the wheels on the land speeder where it just sort of drove over there. And what we wanted was it to hover and sort of float over there. So we shot the shot again with the motion control camera without anything in it except the extras, no vehicle whatsoever. The idea was to put the vehicle in later. And we never did get that shot exactly right. We tried it at ILM at least 5 different times, and then I sent it out to Disney to try, and 2 other visual effects houses outside to try to get the matching of the shot. And in the original release of Star Wars, that shot doesn't look very good. It's one of the worst shots in the whole film. It's dirty, it's full of specks and all kinds of things. It was cleaned up in the special edition a bit, but it should have been a really easy shot to do. And we had a lot of other much more complicated shots that seemed to work fine. So I suppose the big difference between that work in the optical medium then and digital work now is one of what you can see. We had to wait a long time to see anything.
I was in my workshop, and then this young boy came in. He looked about 23 years old, that's all. And he said, "My name's George Lucas." So I'd never heard of George Lucas at that point. And he said, "I've seen what you did on 2001, and I would like you, therefore, to do the work on this film and make the creatures for me." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "Would you want to do the..." I said, "Well, look, I never do a film unless I've read the script first." And he said, "Right." And he got his little case, so he produced the script straight away. I said, "Right." He said, "Well, take it home, read it. That's my number. Let me know." And I read it, and I phoned him, and I said, "I'd love to do it." And that was it.
It's way out by the speeder. We don't want to be in trouble.
I heartily agree with you, sir.
It's about the prejudice against droids, which is, again, symbolic of people intolerant of things that aren't similar to themselves. In this case, life forms. Obviously there's a wide variety of life forms in this movie, in this scene in particular, who are very, very different and very odd. But they're prejudiced basically against non-life forms. So at least one of the ideas here is we've gotten to the point of accepting life forms, no matter how different they look. They're all part of the same life process.
Like you. I'm sorry. I don't like you either.
In Tunisia, when we were shooting there, I obviously spent time with George and had dinner with him a couple of times. And I'm always interested in how producers get the finance to do pictures. Now, whether this is a true story or not, I don't know. All I can tell you is what he told me. I said, "How did you get the finance to make Star Wars?" He said, "Well, I obviously tried a lot of the majors and they weren't interested." But he said, "I took it to a major and they'd had a reasonable success with a picture called The Planet of the Apes." So he said, "I can only assume they saw the big monkey and thought they'd had one monkey make some money for them. They might make some money with this other monkey." So that's how he got the money. That's right, to make the picture.
My name had been put forward through the art department because they were looking for a big character, a big person to do this particular character. She said, "Well, it's what we call a Wookiee. It's a great big hairy creature. When you look at the costume, it has a bear's body and a dog's head on it. If a bear's not on four legs, it walks around on two legs. Therefore, because it's got a big body, the knees bend slightly. Therefore, that is the way that Wookiee walks."
Yes, indeed. If it's a fast ship. Fast ship? You've never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
I always thought when we were making it that it had two strengths. One was the strength of its unoriginal elements. That is to say, the story of the three characters, the story of a boy's gaining manhood, his relationship with his father. That story seemed quite simple and straightforward, and a story that I'd heard before and that I knew was an effective story. Then there was the other element, which was that we were doing a kind of comedy with a kind of bizarre reality to it.
That's the real trick, isn't it? And it's going to cost you something extra.
There's a visual uniqueness that's part of the fabric of Star Wars. We're seeing things we've never seen before that might not be accepted, but I thought would be on the strength of the power of that human story that underlied everything.
We can pay you 2,000 now, plus 15 when we reach Alderaan.
17. Okay, you guys got yourselves a ship.
I think ultimately I'm more interested in getting good actors in my movie. I'm really interested in the acting. A movie star is basically a trademark. It's somebody that you put in the movie because when you sell it to the theaters or you sell it to the audience, you say, "Oh, that's a Tom Cruise movie. I understand. I know Tom Cruise." It's like Coca-Cola. Oh yeah, okay, I'll buy that product. That's what it really comes down to in the end. I don't particularly subscribe to that marketing theory. I basically think if the material is good and it's a very good story, then the audience will find it. And, still I would say most people in Hollywood would think I'm extremely naive. I've made movies without movie stars and they've been dismal failures. But, you know, it's more, I think, a fact that it was not a movie that anybody wanted to see. It wasn't something that sort of sparked their imagination, or it wasn't, you know, the kind of thing that was appropriate at that particular time in the culture.
Well, the choice of cast was very much a combination of what the script really called for and the economics of the film. I've never been a big believer in putting established stars in a kind of fantasy situation where you have to believe their character is totally different from who they are. So we were in total agreement about the fact of using unknowns for the young people, definitely.
There was the last line of the script was, the princess walks up to the end of a huge hallway and all the troops are sort of lined up. She is staggeringly beautiful. And I crossed out the LY and the beautiful and felt more comfortable. But honestly, she was a chip on both shoulders, kind of a princess. And George cast people, I think he said this at the time, one of his few talking jags that lasted 30 seconds, that he cast people with big personalities. So that was the three of us.
Any information from her?
The final checkout is completed. All systems are operational. What course shall we set?
Perhaps she would respond to an alternative.
Very important aspect of making a movie. You got to make people believe in the characters and the story and the situation, which in a movie like this is next to impossible, because obviously everything here is fake. Everything is fake. You know, all the sets and the characters and the worlds. Man, I wanted to make it as realistic as possible so you believe this could actually have existed someplace. A big challenge, especially since it's got kind of a light tone to it. You know, this is not a serious movie. It's a kind of lighthearted movie. And to give it some kind of a grounding so you can believe in the story and believe in the characters and you get wrapped up in the drama of it all.
You watch your language.
There was never an attempt to create a definitive, complete language with all of the verb conjugations or the things that you'd really, imagine. The goal in all of these developments of sound is always to create the impression that there's a real language, that we don't understand it, but it sounds intelligent and it sounds like it has enough culture and background to it to be plausible. I never rigorously insisted on one word having a particular meaning. Jabba the Hutt or other speakers might use the word Bosca in several different contexts. So there was never an attempt to be too rigid about it. It was always an attempt to come up with the right impression at the right time and to keep it consistent in its the kind of vowels and the rhythm of the speech, such that it sounded like it was a real language.
Look, Jabba, next time you want to talk to me, come see me yourself. Don't send one of these twerps.
The animation for this sequence and the Jabba creature was based on Phil Tippett's designs on Jedi. And they were done during, the newer version of the show that was done just a few years ago. George found the plates that he'd shot, and it was quite a bit of work putting Jabba into this, and it was a lot of reconstruction of the plates to move Han over, get him in the right place, get the backgrounds to work and everything, and to have this big character in there that was a lot bigger, I believe, than George's original idea for it. So we had to sort of redo the plates to accommodate the space of the new big sloppy Jabba. And it's pretty cute. A lot of real interesting ideas here. Close contact with Jabba. You just sort of walk around and look at him. It's pretty bold stuff, but it's I think it's foreshadowing what George was ready to do on the first 3 Star Wars movies. He was just testing ILM out to see if we could do it.
Ships as fast as is boasting, we ought to do well.
I remember when Luke sees the Millennium Falcon for the first time, he goes with Han Solo to the hangar where it is in Mos Eisley, and the camera pans over, and then we cut, and I said to George, I think we ought to hold that shot a little longer. He said, you can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? He said, well, that's the last frame. I said, well, you hardly get to see it. He said, well, that's it. That's all we have.
What a piece of junk.
To make 0.5 past light speed, she may not look like...
I've often thought that movies are somehow very similar to the set of a street in a Western, where you see the facade and the window of the saloon and the swinging doors, and if you go behind, it's just a flat piece of wood held up by a few 2x4s, And if you looked at the extension of every shot in Star Wars, you'd see everything would come apart. And the only things that are there is what's presentable. Everything behind the scenes is a mess.
All right, men, load your weapon.
George had us look at a series of films when we started, and those films were 2001, naturally enough, Silent Running, another outer space movie, but the two other films were Fellini's Satyricon and Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, which sound like odd movies to put into this thing, but they were to do with the look he wanted, the style of things. So that in Star Wars, you know, the spaceships were like bit rough, like the Millennium Falcon's like a second-hand car. You're never sure if it's going to start or not. That was great because I'm not used to that.
The jump to hyperspace was an explosive sound. There really were two sounds. The first thing was a generator start, which is a kind of a quick changing pitch of an engine. It was actually an electronic motor I recorded in an elevator shaft. It was the motor which starts an elevator up and down. And that was combined with an explosion, which was really just a piece of a thunderclap. The actual sharp beginning of the thunderclap was cut off, and then it was the more mid-range explosive part of the clap was used for that moment that they actually break out into hyperspace.
So now we're about to introduce the hyperspace idea. This is something that Richard pioneered with his experience at Bob Abel that he had been working at before doing television commercials with streak photography to give a sense of sort of a rubber band effect to things. And it came out really well. You're going so fast that everything just sort of stretches and you're catapulted out into another place in the universe.
Oh, this is the first scene I ever shot.
Governor Tarkin, I should have expected to find you holding Vader's leash. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
Charming to the last. You don't know.
Peter Cushing, he smelled like lavender, but he has an extraordinary face. So I basically just started talking like him. So I may have patterned my performance after his.
No star system will dare oppose the Emperor now.
The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Not after
He wore these little gloves. I think he wore the little gloves because he smoked cigarettes. Then this is the scene where they blow up my planet, and what I looked at was a board with a circle on it, with a guy drinking tea looking like he couldn't wait for lunch.
Alderaan is peaceful. We have no weapons. You can't...
You will prefer another target, a military target?
So when I look terrified at this thing that's going to blow up, it's one of those things that, a flag that, you know, they put in front of a light with a circle. No, that was where the little man was, drinking the tea.
They're on Dantooine.
There, you see, Lord Vader, she can be reasonable. Continue with the operation.
Her personality was very useful in describing the character she plays. Leia was not a huge stretch for Carrie, who was a kind of Hollywood princess growing up with her mom and dad. But her wit is really a display of her intelligence. She really understands what it was that we were doing, and I thought she was very effective.
Are you all right? What's wrong?
George was putting together some insert material that he needed. And through Rick Baker, John Berg and myself and Lane Liska and Doug Beswick and a couple of other guys, Rob Motine, set up this shop, this rubber shop, and mostly over a bunch of masks that Rick had. And John Berg and I, actually all the people on the crew were stop motion animators. And I had some stuff that somehow George had seen. And he was also interested in us doing this little chess sequence as well. He was initially thinking about doing it with live actors and masks. But I think it was because Westworld had come out. There was something very similar to that. So he thought the stop motion animation would be, a fun way of making it different. These little characters were articulated, all the joints were articulated so they could be moved one single frame at a time. And then one frame of 35 millimeter motion picture film was exposed. And it was all set up by Dennis Murin on a completely black set to a lineup clip. He put a little lineup clip in the camera of the background that George shot on location of C-3PO and the Wookiee looking at this chessboard. And so the camera was at the right height and the right angle with the right lens looking at this thing. And it was just all against black. And so we plotted where the little creatures would go and animated the scenes for the frame lengths that were necessary. It was, they weren't more than, 100 frames or something like that, 4 seconds. And once that was shot, then they took that optically and they added some distortion, like whatever they did to some video type distortion to indicate that it was some kind of a holographic type of effect. And then they did a very simple double exposure and printed it into the scene. Right from that moment, we just knew, and we were all big fans of THX and American Graffiti. And George was the first, real director that was doing, sci-fi stuff. And, the first one, we'd all tried to, get work on theatrical features. But in Hollywood at that time, the unions were really clamped down and they were only making things like Poseidon Adventure and Earthquake and these big disaster pictures. And there was no place for things like stop motion animation and other than Whitlock, like matte paintings. So there was no, nothing really happening. And this, George just, kind of made it happen because he knew all these techniques and just recycled them. Had studied how you put these kind of films together and revitalized it and just found all these guys that have been doing all this junk in their garage for years and gave them an opportunity to do it. And it was terrific. And you knew from the minute, that you were looking at the stuff, it was really going to be cool and fun.
To produce the sound of the moving lightsabers, I took the steady recording of the hum and buzz and played it over a speaker in a room and then re-recorded that sound with another microphone. And I could take that microphone and wave it around in the air and it would produce what's called a Doppler effect. That is a pitch shift because the sound is moving relative to the microphone. And by doing that, I was able to take the steady sound of the lightsaber and give it a sense of movement, of coming to and fro or back and forth. And if you did it very quickly in front of the speaker, it would make the sound seem like it was whizzing towards someone in a fight. So it was a matter of not only creating the sound, but also creating a movement of the sound, which gave the lightsabers a basis for their noise and, their credibility.
These little objects here, we sort of shot also motion control with the camera just moving past them. Probably shot about 10 of them and used them over and over and over again. It looked like there was a few dozen going past the camera as they slow down from going into hyperspace.
Got an asteroid push. It's not on any of the charts. What's going on? Our position's correct, except no alder. What do you mean? Where is it? So I'm trying to tell
you. He has a very good navicomputer on this ship. There's a thing there where Obi-Wan Kenobi looks at it very skeptically. Which is one, if you didn't know anything, you just say, what is this clown talking about? But what he was really looking at is, well, I don't believe this. I don't believe he has a navicomputer that can do that. But, okay. I mean, he's, a braggart. Either way, he's a braggart. I think it's sort of hot rod thinking. It's also comes from driving race cars and stuff. Trying to take a windy course and turn it into a straight line is all you spend your time doing. And the fastest car is the one that can get the best line. Doesn't necessarily have the fastest engine.
It's been part of a convoy or something.
Well, he ain't going to be around long enough to tell anybody about us.
Look at me.
These TIE ships were really a very, very fun thing in the show. The design was just strikingly original. And it was one of the things that I just really loved about working on. They were being real models. They were probably about 18 inches wide. Each wing was probably about 15 inches square or something like that. And they were supported by a pole and shot against a blue screen and attached to a motor that we could move it around as well as moving the camera around, move the camera toward it and away from it. And that's how we shot all the models for the first 3 Star Wars films.
Why are we still moving forward? Caught in the tractor beam that's pulling us in. There's got to be something you can
Blue screen is very common in England. We were supposed to do front projection for the interior of the cockpit, and that is part of what happened, and in actuality was a blessing in disguise. Originally, ILM was to supply us with plates for all the interior cockpit, Millennium Falcon, all of that. And we got the first one. It was a plate that went... took about 3 seconds and then froze. I can't use this. It's not possible, because the actors have to react to what's on. So we went blue screen, which we did forever afterwards, because it was found then that it's much easier and more economic for ILM to create the image to the scene as shot rather than have the actors react to something that ILM's created. Plates don't really work because, if you do a car plate, you go out and shoot miles of it. You've got lots of run in and run out. There it would pop up and be gone. That's the only one we ever got. We never did it. We switched to blue screen.
Yes?
We've captured. We're entering the remains of the Alderon system. Its markings match.
With the Millennium Falcon, I can say that we had people going around to salvage dumps, collecting lorry loads of rubbish, actually, truckloads of rubbish, and bringing to the studio. And that's really made up the exterior of the Millennium Falcon. They're mostly bits from cars and scrapyards, and we, let them into the underside of the Millennium Falcon and all over the thing, really. And the controls even, they're all sorts of things that are really just junk that were sprayed and, polished and painted different colors, and we used a huge amount of aeroplane parts. We went to aeroplane breakers and all sorts of places. It literally was junk. So if you look carefully at Star Wars, there's a huge amount of stuff like that in it. And I think we actually a number of films have done that in recent years, and I think it's true to say that Star Wars, we did that on Star Wars, and it's a lot of people have picked up on that, actually.
Boy, it's lucky you had these compartments.
I use them for smuggling. I never thought I'd be smuggling myself in them. This is ridiculous. Even if I could take off, I'd never get past the tractor beam.
Leave that to me.
Damn fool, I knew that you were going to say that.
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?
111.
I'd like to create a movie that has the odor of the past.
I remember one set we used loading pallets of things that people use in warehouses for moving stuff around. We used that and lit underneath it for the claws and things of that sort, really, that really saved our bacon. It really helped to do things quickly and economically.
Give us a hand with this.
I think that George sees, if it's possible to do the shot with plasticine and string, I think that's what he would do. If there's a way of doing something cheaply to achieve a luxurious look, then that's what George would go for. I mean, that's really, I think the moment you stop shooting, if the set falls down, then it's succeeded in what in what you set out to do, because you fool you've achieved that atmosphere. You fool the people into believing it's some lavish environment that actually ideally only exists for the duration of shooting.
Between his howling and your blasting everything inside, it's one of the whole station doesn't know we're here.
Bring them on. I prefer a straight fight to all that sneaking around.
My first assignment was to develop the voice of Chewbacca. They wanted to have samples of what Chewbacca might sound like prior to shooting, because it would be an aid in the actual directing of the film. And it would help the actor, Peter Mayhew, to actually perform the voice of Chewbacca if we knew what Chewie would sound like. Peter Mayhew, once he got really familiar with the sounds, in fact, in some of the later Star Wars films, would actually make the Chewbacca sounds himself. He got pretty good at imitating it. We never used his voice for the actual track of the final movie, but he picked up on the technique and the voice texture of it and did a good imitation.
You have to make noises.
to get the reactions from the other people, from the other actors. You can't stand there in a wiki suit, say, doing nothing. So your body language is working. You're also listening for the lines that are coming off that you have worked out what your reaction is going to be.
Well, you said it, Chewie.
When you've got polystyrene close to your skin and there are holes in the mask which allow sound out, you've got to make fairly big noises.
One of the other jobs I had on Star Wars, I did a lot of the photography and creation of the little images that go on people's view screens. Because I had come out of USC and had a background in basic filmmaking, I was sometimes given assignments when there was something to be done right away, and I was, in some sense, a utility production assistant at that time, and I got sent around to do a lot of different jobs, gather costumes, take people out for hairdo tests, purchase equipment, various miscellaneous jobs, and in one of them, I got involved in the actual photography and the creation of many of the little visuals you see on the view screens, the targeting devices on board the X-Wing fighters, the little displays on the Death Star that are inset into the control panels. Many of these were tiny rear projection units. That is, there's a tiny 16mm movie projector built into the console or behind the wall of the set, projecting a previously photographed movie of a computer graphic or a diagram or something into these little screens. At the time, computer graphics were virtually unknown. We used them in a very primitive state to create some of the video graphics in the film. The most notable example is the Death Star battle plans, which are displayed by General Dodonna in the film. That was a product of a very early piece of computer animation, which was done, perhaps the first thing of its kind for the Star Wars movie and for feature films in general.
I'm going to put these on you. Okay.
In most film production, you don't have all the time you want. Sometimes the easiest thing to do and your only choice is to just do it yourself. And so a lot of the voices that get thrown in, little incidental sounds like the mouse robot going down the hallway, was really just myself doing funny little vocalizations and speeding the tape up and running it backwards and so on to produce little tiny robot voices.
Somebody came on the set at this point. George was very, very quiet. So quiet that we had a journalist visit the set, and after 3 days, he asked which one was the director. But he talks more now, George.
There's another story going on here where Vader senses that Obi-Wan is on the Death Star. One of the fun things for me about this movie was that I was making it episode 4, which is why I was so adamant about having that on the film. There's a lot of backstory that just, it's interesting the film was successful as it is, and I hardly told any of the story, but the other backstory is they had this whole confrontation and thing, and Obi-Wan almost killed him, and he put him in this suit and everything, and now they're confronting each other again after all these years. THX is very similar in a way to this film in that it's the idea of throwing you into a completely alien environment and not explaining anything about how it works. I felt good about the way it worked out in that movie, and that gave me the confidence to go on and continue to do it. Sometimes I guess it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it needs to be more about, the story and getting, as I say, it's like going through hyperspace. You're getting really from point A to point B. That's the real issue. And you're doing it because you don't want to waste time. And you want to be able to get characters back and forth from halfway across the galaxy in a few minutes. You don't want to have to dwell on. You either use a cinematic device of just chopping out all the travel, or you, in science fiction and stuff, you have a chance to sort of invent some kind of bogus technology that does it for you. In this particular case, in a lot of science fiction, a lot of the technology isn't very bogus. It's actually real. It just nobody knows much about it. I mean, and every year there's more and more proof about traveling faster than the speed of light and things that were 20 years ago were thought to be impossible.
We gotta find out which cell this princess of yours is in. Here it is, 2187. Go and get her. I'll hold him here.
It was very hot for everybody in these outfits.
Everything's under control. Situation normal.
What happened?
There was a lot of when they said cut after each scene, the first AD would always shout off with their heads, which would apply to stormtroopers, Wookiees, robots, and at a certain point, I would have liked it to apply to me. But it was an amazing, and very much so with the Ewoks, who used to pass out with regularity. Tony had this little board he used to lay on, because they couldn't really take his outfit off. It would take 9 years. So head off, people would bring him a drink with a straw. But fainting, it was shot in the summer, I think. I was lucky when you think all I lacked was a bra.
He is here.
Obi-Wan Kenobi. What makes you think so?
A tremor in the Force. The last time I felt it was in the presence of my old master.
Surely he must be...
Darth Vader, we had somebody who was just very large, and therefore it was much more difficult for us to find somebody who could take and put a voice to that, because he didn't move around a lot. The suit was very restrictive, and it was very hard for him to get any kind of articulate gestures out that made sense in terms of acting.
Princess, put all sections on alert.
Obi-Wan is here. The Force is with him.
If you're right, he must not be allowed to escape.
Escape is not his plan. I must face him alone.
When you work on a film like this in post-production, you see often the dailies or the film before it's edited together, and you see outtakes and other shots when the stormtroopers blow through the wall. To come in and into the detention area to get Han and Chewie. There was another take where the explosion on the set was so big that it actually blew out the set wall on either side of the door, exposing ordinary wooden 2x4s and studs in the wall. But the stormtroopers, being who they are, they came charging through the holes between the studs. They came through the wall everywhere. Some of them tripped and fell down. Others fell on top of them. They were relentless, even though the door hadn't opened, but the wall had opened.
All systems have been alerted to your presence, sir. The main entrance...
It seemed to be a science fiction film that had a sense of humor. I mean, it was really funny. Robots arguing over whose fault it was. I mean, it really reminded me of a fairy tale. There was a farm boy and a princess.
I'm a very ungrateful hostage.
Some rescue. Came in here. Did you have a plan for getting out?
You actually believe that she's a force to be reckoned with, even against somebody like Harrison Ford.
Grimacing. I had to finally take gun lessons because I wasn't supposed to grimace when I shot a gun, because that would imply that I was not familiar with the action, which I wasn't. So I took gun lessons from the same guy that taught Robert De Niro for Taxi Driver, and I grew to be very proud of my targets. You shoot at targets, and, I would take them home to my then husband. Look how well I did with my shotgun today. But this is the movie where I grimace. Mark is grimacing too. I don't know why I did those. I hope he had to have those lessons too.
Now you've discovered.
By the end, I was dreaming in squibs, in explosives. In the trash compactor, I think we all have wetsuits on, so maybe that starts soon. That's so exciting. Sometimes you can see the two little dots in the back of Chewbacca's throat. I used to say that maybe we could do a sequel where there was just shopping and, facials and stuff.
It's worth.
There's something alive in here.
That's your imagination.
Something just moved past my leg. Look, did you see that? What?
People don't know that. Did you know that was a Dianoga? I mean, I still think, pardon me, George, could this be Dianoga Poo Poo? Who was a wonderful ad lib because there's all this stuff floating around in the water. And he looked at me like I had just shot his pet dog and put his foot on my chest and pushed me back into the trash compactor. I had to go back and because you have to keep getting changed and your hair blown dry. But it just seemed, I'm sure he's in the zone and he's seeing what he wants to do. And we're just like actors trying to stave off boredom because, you know, we've been in the trash compactor all morning.
Another thing I like about this scene is that Chewie panics. He doesn't like it. And it never didn't get a chance really for Chewie to express himself very much in the movie in terms of his emotional feelings. He usually goes along with the program. But this is the one place where he doesn't go along with the program. He just doesn't like it. Wants to get out. It's not always a brave Wookiee, and I like that in it.
Chewbacca was another guy who was kind of based on an illustration from a science fiction novel of the past. George had a Xerox copy of this thing, which showed a tall, hairy figure. And I did some sketches, sort of variations on that theme. George was talking about a lemur look, or big lemur eyes. And I did some real big ape-like, huge, muscular sort of superhero figure with this lemur face with a flak jacket on, all kinds of bandoliers of ammunition and so forth strapped around. The person that actually modeled him and who had done the ape figures for 2001 actually did it.
You know, in all these films I had limited resources, so, you know, in this particular film I was very careful. You know, the costumes are extremely simple. The bad guys all wear sort of gray uniforms, and the most complicated fashion statement is Princess Leia's white dress.
Take over. See to him. Look, there.
They're madmen. They're heading for the prison level. If you hurry, you might catch them.
The ancillary market didn't exist at this point. You showed it in a movie theater, you hoped to make your money back, and then your big chance at picking up extra money was to sell it to television. And that was it. There wasn't anything after that. So the risk was quite big on everybody's part.
The biggest thing that people now don't realize is that actually $10 million in 1977 was a low-budget movie. And even if you were doing a comedy, let alone a visual effects movie. So in the day of $200 million movies, getting that done for that money and into the cinema on time, given the whole series of problems we had and how little money there was probably one of the things I'm most proud of.
You come in! They aren't here. Something must have happened to them. See if they've been captured. Hurry.
Since most of my scenes were alone with R2-D2, who's totally silent throughout filming, and I was talking to myself, and I would write out his dialogue in the sense of, I mustn't go crazy here. I must know what I'm saying and he's saying to me. But I did spend days and days alone, and days becoming more and more of a prop. And eventually, there was some kind of party at Elstree, and so I got some matches printed up as a kind of joke, but not really a joke. And they just had the simple words, 3PO is human. A simple message, but straight from the heart. Mine, not his. And what happened was that, for days afterwards, people would come up to me and say, Tone, you got any more of those books of matches? Because, they're like really neat and everything, and, it'd be nice to have one as a souvenir. Then they go away and next day, totally forgotten the message.
Listen to them. They're dying, Artu. Curse my metal body. I wasn't fast enough. It's all my...
Just the fact that we were traveling around in spaceships made it science fiction. But when people thought of science fiction then, I guess they were thinking more along the lines of 2001 or Planet of the Apes. This one was hilarious and reminded me of Wizard of Oz, really, in terms of a young person being swept away on a big adventure. But it seemed like the cinematic equivalent of what Frank Baum did in his books, in that it was the environment that was the leading character, really. So that once the story of Luke was over, there were many more stories to tell.
This is a matte painting that was used to extend the shaft there. It's actually on a sound stage. Just a little part in the frame is all that was built, and the rest is all painted on a piece of glass and added later on. There are in this sequence, though, some photo cutouts painted flats in the background that we didn't do, but it's a sort of an idea of a big full-size matte painting. They get back to when they're walking around that thing again.
Wait till here!
There were such wonderful artists in England where they made these movies. They worked, the old apprentice program, where they worked for years and years under someone before they became, really skilled enough to do the work, on their own. And they started with theatrical backgrounds, hundreds of years ago, and trickeries and everything for stage sets. And that same craftsmanship has worked its way into the movies. And a lot of the sets you see in the Star Wars films and in a lot of other British films that were made around that time, are full of backgrounds that look like they're sets, but they're paintings, little parts of them where they can get away with it, and it saves enormous amounts of money and adds a lot of scope to the films. And the sets that a lot of the set makers could also make, the rock formations that they could make, and all were just very, very skilled people. This whole thing, the British added to it. Certainly George had an awful lot to do with it, but the technicians there were and set makers and all, are just so good.
There she is. C-3PO, do you copy?
Yes, sir.
Are you safe?
The British crew was quite bemused by this project. I think they felt it was an unknown quantity. They couldn't see from the script how it could possibly work. We were talking about only the live-action scenes. They didn't know anything about the visual effects. They hadn't seen any drawings or anything except for the art department. So it's, I suppose, somewhat natural that they might be a lot of head-scratching. George had come out of 5 guys and a camera, and everybody did everything, to this system where every department was very carefully defined, and there wasn't any crossover.
I was an American director. I was very young, and I had a beard and long hair. So I had a bunch of strikes against me. British crews aren't very forgiving anyway. They're very professional, they're very good, and they're very talented, but they definitely look at the pecking order very different than we do in the United States. At 5:30, we had to stop, unless we were in the middle of a shot. I could ask the crew for an extra 15 minutes, and they'd vote on it, but they always voted me down. So I knew that I wasn't going to get my extra 15 minutes. Wherever I was at 5:30, I had to stop. And there was one time in Obi-Wan Kenobi's house where it was 5 o'clock. I had to shoot this scene. So what I did is I made a very elaborate dolly shot that had the wide shot, the medium shot, the close-ups, and everything in this one shot, and ended up shooting until about 7 o'clock, and the crew was completely furious with me. But I did get the day's work done. But in the end, in a normal crew, in a normal situation, you simply ask them and say, we're in trouble, we have to get off this set, I need the extra time to do this, and they give it to you.
This was right in the beginning also. This is where I thought they'll just let me splat against the wall and bring in Jodie Foster because I didn't lose the weight. Oh, and I also said, like at the time Johnny Carson was still on, and I would say, here they come, about the stormtroopers. See, look at the big grimacing with the lower teeth. This was not my favorite moment. My expectation was splat, bring in the new girl. A lot of this kind of acting is sort of reacting. I mean, you're in these sort of very, there's squibs going off, and you're running around and you're yelling at people a lot. So there's no time for really any moments. There was a moment that I finally had in Empire, I think, and in the third one with the Ewok. But you never slow up long enough to be able to make what I believe are called choices or anything like that.
So see, here's a jump cut. See right there? That's the jump cut. On Alec Guinness, he held the handle. Technician came in and put the stick in it and then walked away and then cut those frames out. You see, he jumps just a little bit in order to get that rod in there for the front projection.
Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, God.
Now, the hardest thing for me on the first fights, Darth Vader was a very heavy man, right? Obi-Wan Kenobi was a gentleman, right, who had done some fencing in the theatre, right? So I'm the only man who would wish I could reshoot the first fight when you first saw it, because I had to teach them to stop before they touched, because the blades were breaking. We broke so many blades because Dave was heavy and just strong. Yes, I mean, he couldn't really pull it enough. So if we could reshoot it again, I would love to do it, because I really could do it properly this time. Because we learned from that, then the next fight, the next two pictures, that provided you had a material which didn't snap, you could get better action, better fights. So we ended up what I call fishing rods, because they made of carbon fiber. And literally it was a fishing rod. We didn't have to rotate it, because the other thing on Empire, we were told we couldn't fight behind stairs and things like that because they lost the line for doing the animation, right? So we were very careful. Everything was in front of the buildings and in front of the metalwork and in front of it. But then we discovered, when we did Return of the Jedi, that it was possible now to go behind all this thing and still keep the line for the blades. But it was trial and error in the first instance.
The idea that you could learn how to become one with the Force at will, which means to give up your corporal body and become part of an energy field just by willing it to happen, came out of the Buddhist idea, but it basically worked for the plot device here of the whole subtext of the Force and the ability to join the Force grew out of that reality, which is a subtext that is, again, one of those things that's kind of confusing to a lot of people. One of the issues that's in the backstory is the idea that the Force surrounds you and is part of you, and when you die, you become one with the Force. But it's an energy field, so you just become energy, and you don't have your individuality or personality anymore. Just energy, and the energy comes and goes, and it's partly generated by life and partly influenced by life.
Run, Luke, run.
I hope that old man got that tractor beam out of commission, or this could be a real short trip. Okay, hit it!
The one who ultimately finds out the way to do it is Qui-Gon Jinn. He teaches Yoda, Yoda teaches Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan and Yoda together at the end help the old Anakin Skywalker come back and keep his individuality away as part of the Force.
The Death Star model was probably about 3 feet wide. Most of the planets that are in the show, though, are paintings or photographs of little balls that have been painted and stuck onto black parts with stars painted on them. But the Death Star was an actual model we made because we had so many shots where you were approaching it and the sun is viewed in different angles on it, things like that we really wanted to be able to move in on it and give a sense of perspective changes that you wouldn't get from just still photographs.
And God knows what this is. But I think I'm kind of maternal toward him.
There wasn't anything you could have done.
Come on, buddy, we're not out of this yet.
But I think, too, they based the rest of the relationships in 2 and 3 on how we behave together in this movie.
It was really difficult for all of us to understand what George was talking about when he was saying that these TIE ships should fly fast. Because fast to us meant 3 or 4 seconds to go through the shot, and George wanted to go through in half a second. So very quickly, boom, you just see a glimpse of this racing through. One way we accomplished the sense of speed was to move the background instead of the model. So there's times when you see the TIE ship slowly moving by, but the stars are racing by in the background. That gave that same sense of speed. The advantage of it was it gave a sense of speed when you could see the shape of the TIE ship. The other way, all we had were a bunch of blurs.
One of the other areas that we had a very hard time with was the explosions that were supposed to be in outer space, which would mean that all of the explosive material would go out in all directions. We needed to find some way of doing these explosions where the stuff didn't look like it all fell down on the ground with gravity. So we found a facility which had a 50-foot height to the rafters, and we put the camera on the floor shooting straight up through a piece of glass, a high-speed camera, and then put the explosive charges up in the rafters so that they would blow out in all directions. And we spent days shooting explosions of all kinds and sizes just to see if it would work. And in the end, that did work.
Don't get cocky!
There's still two more of them out there.
When I was assigned the sequence that we called the gunport sequence, because all I had was blue screen material of our actors on their set, the best way for George to convey to me what he was after was what he had put together, the newsreel footage of dogfights from World War II. Because it's so kinetic, you have to see it in order to understand what he was after. You don't get that idea at all from the script of what it would be. And it was just the movement of it that led me to understand, okay, what you're after is really leading the eye from, cut to cut.
To do a storyboard didn't tell you very much. It was a very static thing, and it just has the guy in the foreground and says the ship goes through. But I had to be able to say, look, this is what I want it to do in time. But I couldn't really be sloppy about, this film, shoot that for a couple seconds. I had to say exactly how many frames it was going to be, and then how it fit into the next shot, and how each shot fit together, and then how that all played. So it was really designed more as an editorial exercise than as a static shot-by-shot exercise. It was more about the flow of the motion than what the individual shots were, and I was able to achieve that by cutting together lots of old documentary footage and stuff to have movement. I'm sure it had been done before. In animation, they call it a Leica reel, which is they take it and they take their storyboards and they cut them together. And sometimes they do little bits of animation that go in there to get a sense of how everything is working. And so it isn't completely unknown in the animation world. Now we can do it with digital visualization process by which we can use computer animation to shoot a scene. But in those days, I either did it with old footage, we did some animation, we did little tiny models that we shot on video sometimes. There's lots of different ways to accomplish it, but it does limit how you can tell a story. Whereas now that we're doing everything completely animated, I can pretty much shoot anything any way I want. I'm not limited to chases and things like the snow battle in the second film, where it's just so specific that there is no footage that exists that's like that.
Most of the planets in the original Star Wars film were paintings that were done on sheets of glass by Harrison Ellenshaw or Ralph McQuarrie. Then when we redid the film many years later on, we did some with computer graphic planets to give a little bit of motion on them. This is Lauren Peterson down in Guatemala. He was down there with camera crew and shot that. He's one of our model makers, and it's pretty funny. He probably made the model that he's shooting at there. And the way that it kind of worked is I was shooting at the night shift. We only had one real flexible camera we could shoot with. Richard was shooting in the daytime. I was shooting at nighttime, so we could make use the camera 24 hours a day. And he'd come in and give me, 2 or 3 different storyboards, George would personally, and say, okay, now we're going to try to shoot this element and this tie ship and this one, and how many do you think you can get tonight? And I do what I could, maybe get 2 or 3 of them in one night. Other times it may only get 1 a night, and that was sort of how we worked it, working directly with him. He would describe just what he wanted, and then go off and I'd be on my own to shoot the shots and give the performance that he was after. Then later on, it would go to the optical department, and they would combine all the elements together, and if it was all done right, it looked pretty amazingly real.
The battle station is heavily shielded and carries a firepower greater than half the Starfleet.
we were kind of like a weird kind of fraternity of robotic photography nuts. We had lots of ideas of how to, of how to do weird kinds of photography using high technology and surplus equipment to strap together to make different kind of images. And so Star Wars came along just at the perfect time for us.
We would just go to meetings over, Joe Johnson and I, and look at drawings and talk about what to do next, Joe would bring in something and I would say, oh, I think that's great, but I'd make a drawing of it myself. And Joe would do the same with my things. He took the Sandcrawler, for instance, and made it a more boxy, taller thing than I had, which I think worked fine. I liked it. I would take his drawings of the X-Wing and put my own look to them, a little more streamlined, a little more sport car-like. I kind of thought we were all working on the same movie, and we just had fun. Whatever occurred to us, we should do.
Orbiting the planet at maximum velocity. The moon with the rebel base will be in range in 30 minutes.
This will be a day long remembered. It has seen the end of Kenobi and will soon see the end of the rebellion.
I mean, I always thought, the character Luke Skywalker was George. George growing up. George facing conflict and the need to prove himself. And he did. Powerfully. And so you'd see the character of Luke Skywalker change from one film to the next and develop in much the same way George was developing.
They could use a good pilot like you. You're turning your back on them. What good's the reward if you ain't around to use it? Besides, attacking that battle station ain't my idea of courage. It's more like suicide.
There was no special effects companies in those days. In the studios, special effects department had been disbanded. There were a few matte painters still left, but basically there was no industry. Part of that was because of the expense, and part of it was that the American taste, the culture had gone toward very realistic-looking films in the 50s, very psychologically driven contemporary movies. But as a result, special effects just disappeared. And so trying to start that all over again was a very, very big challenge. I knew cinema, so I knew kind of how to do everything, but the intricacies and the overwhelming challenge I wasn't really aware of. I was pretty naive at that point. In the beginning, I was going to do it for $3 million. And then when I got the script, it moved to 10. And I said, I'll hire a bunch of people and we'll put them together and make a group and make the movie. I knew there was very few people out there. And so I went around to the commercial companies and everything and picked the few people that had any experience at all doing special effects. And, we built a company up out of it. And I think the average age at that point was about 23, 24 years old when they were all kids out of college.
When Gary and George and I spoke the first time about this Star Wars story, we talked about how the camera would be in motion with the aircraft, much like gun cameras were in the Second World War. So that was really the conceit. How do we get these images on film that make the audience feel as though they're a participant on an individual basis?
No one had ever tried to do the visual effects side the way we were proposing it. We approached the visual effects as a grand experiment, saying, can we do this with a lot of people who work on architectural models and in commercials and have never made feature films before, but we can approach everything in a new and unique way. And even though each of the techniques that we used was not new, it had been used by somebody, but we just combined them in a way that hadn't been used before. We realized that because there were hundreds of individual shots, that we would never have time or the money to do them all in the traditional way. So we would have to, in effect, library things. We'd shoot elements and put them away in the library and use them for as many shots as we could. So a lot of shots, for instance, of the X-Wing fighters flying, we would shoot a fighter on the stand, and the only computer aspect to the whole thing was controlling servo motors that it would remember what it did. We went back to the idea of the operators using a joystick and actually driving the shot mechanically by hand, but the computer remembered what happened, those servo motors, and so we could duplicate it again and again and again for the different passes. And that was the breakthrough in that technique, because we could do one pass for lit normally, and we can do one pass lit for another shot, and we can do another pass for the engines if you saw the engines glowing.
We were learning to maneuver them around and shoot it at a very, very slow speed, that when you projected it back at a faster speed, it looked like the spaceships were racing by at a fast speed. But actually, it might take 2 minutes for the camera and model to run very slowly. But when you projected it back, the shot goes by in 2 seconds.
Standing by. Red 2, standing by.
11, standing by.
Red 5, standing by. Block airfoils in attack position.
This is the X-Wings opening up, which I remember very clearly shooting in 76, but now redoing them. And they were a little funny when we did them the first time around. They sort of jumped and weren't quite as realistic looking as this stuff is. So now we start the big final battle, the final space battle. Most of the shots at the beginning here, actually during the battle too, were redone to just make the shots better than what we'd originally done in 76, 77. And they were done by, computer graphics, the way we sort of do things now. The close-ups are all, the original photography, and in cases, the background ships are all new. A lot of the backgrounds in the sequence, though, are the original backgrounds that we did. That were actually photographs of the Death Star pieces that we had made and photographed and then replicated in 8x10 photos and stuck them onto a big sort of hemisphere, probably about 6 or 8 feet across, and then rephotographed that. And these pieces were modularly made. They were all about 1 foot square and probably about 6 or 8 different designs, and we made hundreds of them. And when you put them all together like a checkerboard and get back and look at it, it looks like this massive, massive set of buildings and structures and you don't know what. But they're really very few number of different pieces, just copied over and over and over again.
Get the crews to their fighters.
And the set's pretty small. Most of these explosions that you see are done on this little miniature set with the little Death Star pieces that are in a tiny little scale.
With your Red 3.
Again, the pieces are about 1 foot square that are probably representing 200 or 300 feet each square. So some of the explosions in them are looking nowadays a little bit out of scale. But at the time, there was really no other way we could do it, or no time or no money to do anything on a bigger scale.
Be in firing range in 7 minutes.
Luke, trust your feelings.
And it all, like somehow magically happens with a lot of struggling and planning and some sort of magic power that people turn on themselves or something near the end. The work just, in the last 2 months really can happen at an incredible speed, and the quality can be just really, really great also. So it all did come together, and the show got done and on time and in the theaters.
If you picked one up, watch it.
Of course, there were many new ships that needed sounds. The Y-wing fighters have a kind of howling sound as you are flying in the cockpit with them. And that howling is actually wind recorded atop a mountain. Actually, when I was up trying to record guy wires for lasers, the wind was blowing so hard through one set of guy wires that it actually was producing a musical note. It was almost a musical chord, and it was used principally for the background sounds of the pilots in the Y-wing fighters.
But not bad. Oh, go see what you can do with it.
The thing of cleaning up the film and everything, you do have with modern technology a chance to fix some of the technical problems that existed in some of these shots. Matte lines and things that you just couldn't deal with in the end. When you're making something and it's flawed and you want to fix it, I don't know an artist around that doesn't go back and touch their work up years later if they have the opportunity, especially painters. And of course, theater is that way. Most people go back and either rewrite stuff or repaint stuff or fix it a little bit. The issues are ultimately in terms of society is whether it's okay for other people to go in and start changing things and then still put that artist's name on it. You know, say it's a George Lucas film and somebody else has gone in and recut it and changed it and put different music on it. That's a big issue now. And personally, I think that as long as the artist can continue to have the enthusiasm to refine the work, they should do it. But I don't think that studios or other people should be allowed to go and tamper with something just because they want to put it on television or they want to take it from black and white to color or they want to have a more contemporary score on it.
They've stopped. Stabilize your rear deflectors.
The trench was probably about 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide, and the Dextraflux camera we had could just barely go between the walls, but it cranked away at about 1 frame of film a second. So at 24 frames a second, you know, it could look like it's going very, very fast, even though it was only moving probably about a foot a second down the track. And the track we were shooting on was 40 feet. And I believe we had about 40 or 50 feet of trench made. And at the end of it, we had a photograph of that same trench that was shot from the outside of it that we blew up and put down at the end. So it looked like it went on farther. But you're just seeing, again, the photograph at the end. We originally tried doing that with a mirror down there, but it revealed the camera and all sorts of other things. So we had to go with a photo.
We've analyzed their attack, sir, and there is a danger. Should I have your ship standing by?
Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances.
Rebel base 3 minutes and closing.
Red boys, this is Red Leader. Red Leader, this is Base 1.
This is one of my favorite shots here. There's 3 ships going in to a pattern. That was actually the original scene from the original film, has not been redone. And that was just a really nice animatic that George had for that shot. And I think I got all those elements in one night, which was quite a night.
This is it.
There's so many tricks going on to be able to get these shots to work. And you can see sometimes the perspectives aren't quite lining up. Ships are coming a little bit too low or too high, but it really adds a lot to the reality of the sequence. That's sort of a chaotic look to it that you wouldn't get if you planned everything out too much. And that's something George had talked to us about intentionally. My background on it was to really sort of figure things out, and he said, no, you know, just do what you can, and we'll sort of piece it together later on. And that was absolutely the right approach, and that's the approach that I've certainly taken since. You know, I learned from him is not to get too worried and stop progress in trying to figure things out in advance. Get in and sort of put it together. Work on it a little bit if you like it. Trust your instincts. Move ahead. Shoot the next part. Same thing. Shoot the next part. And you end up with something that looks a lot more natural and organic and grown than something that's pre-planned, because a lot of this stuff is just too complicated to figure out. For example, the background star fields, we didn't analyze how fast the stars should be going by in the background. We shot a number of them just whipping by at 3 or 4 different speeds, and then we would combine it with the foreground and just pick the speed that looked best for that moment and looked best, in telling the story. So what you end up with then is a chance to cheat reality. And this whole film, this whole battle sequence is a cheat on reality. You know, these ships that appear to be peeling off and diving down and doing things. If you actually had 3 ships up there doing that for real, they would really have to be much farther apart from each other, and the shot would not be nearly as dramatic as it is when you sort of put these shots together.
These shots of the cannons shooting at the ships in the Death Star, that was one of the first shots. That was the first shot that came out of ILM.
Watch yourself. Increase speed full throttle. What about
Well, there was a drama here when I came back from shooting in August, and they showed me about 7 shots, and I only approved that one shot because the others were not very good. And I sent them back to do it all over again. So ultimately, it wasn't very happy, but especially when we had about 400 shots to do and only about 3 or 4 months to do them. But nobody'd ever done more than 50 shots in a movie. You know, in terms of movies, they never had more than 50 special effects shots. So we were trying to do something that would normally take 5 years to do, and we were trying to do it in a few months.
Hurry, Luke, they're coming in much faster this time. Get hold.
R2 trying to increase the power.
What we've got here is some sort of animated film, you know, that's done with models, and the designs are not so much from reality, but the designs are from, you know, George and us that are contributing, you know, our sort of aesthetics to it to try to make it just look exciting and really neat to look at.
On the video.
Hang on, R2.
You're interacting with the real world, even though everything is fake. You're still, the technology is the real world that you're interacting with, and when it says you can't go there, then you have to figure out another way to get there, because the story point is to get there. And the problem you have is actually, how do we accomplish that?
It was difficult with R2-D2 on the back of the X-Wing through all the shows, because R2, of course, is blue. And shooting against a blue screen, which we had to do on those cockpit shots, meant that, you know, the blue sort of disappears. So if you look at R2, when he's going through the trench, his blue color is gone. And there in the background, though, when you see him behind Luke, the blue color's back. That's something we could do later on, but we couldn't do it when we did these films. It was shooting blue in front of blue.
Well, I remember the last change we made in the film. It was quite late in the whole process. George came in, he said, I want to add a couple of shots to the final reel. I said, what's that? He said, I want Vader to get away. So there were shots inside Vader's cockpit that were done with a camera mounted on a circular track. And the film shot from this camera would show Vader sitting in the seat, and Vader's image would spin. So we found a piece of the shot where Vader was spinning. They had shot this spinning thing for when his ship went out of control. They wanted to show that he had lost control of the ship, and they spun the camera around him. But we found the daily, and we looked at it, and there was a part where the camera started into motion. So it started out just head on Vader, and then started to spin. We took the film, we ran it backwards, so that the ship seemed to settle. He seemed to be able to get control of the ship. And then we cut to an exterior shot that they hadn't shot anything for. So we took one of the elements of an earlier shot of Vader's ship accompanied by his two wingmen. We eliminated the wingmen. We changed the background to be a star field. And we created this moment where after the explosion of the Death Star, Vader gets control of the ship and sails off into space. So I said to George, I said, look, doesn't this smack too much of a sequel? I mean, isn't this like, you know, this kind of, today you'd say cheesy. You know, I forget what word I used. This looks like you're setting up a sequel. And he said, I don't care. I'm doing it. So I think George had a sense at that point that there might be more films in the offing.
I wouldn't come back. I didn't do it. Well, I'm going to let you get all the credit and take all the...
The first film was like going to the amusement park for the first time for many people. It was just so full of so many surprises, and that was part of the success of it. It was just surprised you at every level, and it kind of awakened the producers of films and the public as to the value that a stereo, high-quality soundtrack could have on the impact of a motion picture. And it set in motion a chain of events which led to a real upgrading of theater systems around the country and higher expectations on the part of the audience as to what they would hear when they go into a film. So Star Wars kind of opened up that world creatively for us. We stumbled into it at the time. It was the vision of Gary Kurtz and George Lucas, who wanted to give the film a grand scale. They're the ones that were champions of the cause to do the film in stereo and release it that way as widely as they could across the country. And it really opened the door creatively for many films to follow.
When I first saw the film, I sort of couldn't connect with it because I knew it too well. I knew every little flaw, but the audience around me was going crazy. And they really, really were just amazed by it. And came out afterwards, we were talking about it, and people were saying, this is going to be the biggest thing of all time. And, you know, as we were doing it, some people thought so, but mainly there was one guy there who was a driver, working for us, a young guy, and he was going around saying all the time, this is going to be a huge hit. This is going to be the most amazing film ever. And he was absolutely right. He saw it. And from that initial screening that I saw, and apparently it's happened everywhere, when they had early screenings, the people were going crazy.
Poor old Chewie don't get nothing. But thinking about it and looking at it over the years, Chewie does get the final line in the movie, because just before the credits come up, there is a big Wookiee growl. You've got to listen for it, but it's there.
The credit issue was, I suppose, a big one in the 70s, where most of the credits for films were at the beginning. All of the labor union contracts required that for the big roles, and we felt that it was best in this kind of story, if we were going to have the roller that we had indicating the story, that we wanted just to have the title and the roller and get into the story as quickly as possible, so that we didn't have to build a musical sequence for the credits or worry about a credit sequence. Some films can do it really effectively, like they did with the Pink Panther films, where you have an animated sequence and you make another mini movie out of the credit sequence. You can do very well with that, but we didn't want to do that, and we felt the end was the best. So we had to negotiate with everybody whether or not that was okay. And of course, the other big thing was whether or not we could actually credit the people that we wanted to credit, because up till that time, Fox's rule and most of the other major studios was that only heads of departments got credit, which limited the amount of credits that you could give, and the rest of the people didn't get any credit. And my attitude was, well, you're talking about a role at the end. Why not allow us to put these other names on there? Everybody contributed really a lot of effort to this, and we'd like to credit them. And so we ended up with I think a 4.5-minute end credit roller, which the studio was aghast at. And we said, we've never done this before. And we had to get special dispensation to do it. Now that credits run to 10, 12 minutes, I'm afraid I have to accept the responsibility for starting that trend. But putting them at the end, anyway, I think is a really good idea for a lot of films, and because it allows you to get right into what's going on and not have to worry about a credit sequence.
Well, there was this sort of weird electric kind of reaction. I didn't quite know what to think, but one had never seen anything like it in terms of the spacecraft thing going. And it wasn't, I had never had any kind of urgency, we need more films where there's a spacecraft going, that had never been my thing. But I knew there was this odd kind of big reaction to it, and it was a little bit baffling.
The entire film was shot in, I think, about 70 days. And to do a film this complex in 70 days is sort of like doing American Graffiti in 30. It's just, you don't have really much time to do anything. Star Wars is one of those things that happens to you in life that you don't expect. But it ended up taking over my life, and I ended up, spending the next 30 years making these films. I mean, I love the films. But it's quite a bit of commitment to your life, I'll tell you, when you get down to the day-to-day struggle.
I had a friend that was working at the LA Art Museum, and I said, look up the grosses of all the most successful fantasy and science fiction films of the last 20 years or so. And I remember my assessment was, there was a contingency plan that if the first one were successful, that we would do a second and a third. I said, this is going to be easily as popular as Planet of the Apes. That's what I thought. So I thought it was, a real winner. And I didn't really think in terms of budget and how much it had to gross. That wasn't my main interest. It was just the quality of it. And if they pull it off, it could develop a real cult following that I know.